Today, you could look at as extraordinarily frightening, terrible, awful. You could accuse God of being a murderer, or you could look at it truthfully, and that is that today is when the good starts. Today is when the good comes to earth. Today is when good creation begins, and all of what we've done wrong is in the process of ending. The interesting thing about that, as we all know, that's what today pictures, is Christ coming to earth and starting his kingdom. And the resurrection, the better resurrection, the first resurrection, is when the saints join with him. That's the point. The church joins with him. We're in a dying world. The president just this morning asked for an inquiry into treason for those who are turned on him. There's where we are. And the process is not going to get better. We're in a divisive world, and this is the nation where we can speak freely. This is going on around the world, as we talked about on Sabbath. 1.7 billion people are homeless right now, moving from one country, one place to another. This is a world that's in the process of dying. And just like what happens when a building is on fire, or a plane crashes, or there's an accident on the road, who goes to help? The first responders. The first responders are going to help. The first responders are going to fix it. The beginning of good is because of the first responders together. You know, there's many ways to look at God. There's the ways that humanity looks at him. They look at him with fear. They look at him with ignorance. They look at him with despising. They look at him with self-righteousness, false religion, and even as if he's their footman. Oh God, I have my desires. I have my will. Please follow me around so that I can have them. Bless my ideas. He's not our footman. He doesn't find us parking spaces, unless he wants to. There is a way that God acts. There's an overarching way that God acts. And when humanity can find that out, they might be able to learn to imitate him. You know, as we heard over the decades, there are two basic ways of life: give and get. And those two ways are deeper than we think. Here's your title, we are actually part of God's divine plan for all. We're in the process of teaching mankind God's thinking, God's approach, God's way. You say, well, God's doing that. Yes, we're doing it with him. See, there's a divine overarching plan being worked out here on earth. Have you thought of it this way? There's no discussion on this issue. We're not debating with Satan or with society, and God is not debating with us. It's not up for discussion. He's going to fix it. And this day pictures that. Trumpets begins the change to good life. And the all-knowing God is going to work out his plan as it was originally designed. So our first thought is that God intends for his creation to know him. He intends for that. Let's turn over to Jeremiah 29. You say, well, what's there? Well, you should know. Jeremiah 29. Because it's one of those encouraging places of the Bible, one of those encouraging places that in the book of Jeremiah you wouldn't think you'd find it, because people say when you're ranting and raving about how negative things are, you're exuding a Jeremiad. Well, Jeremiah was very positive because he was associated with God, agreed with God, led by God, and the things he said that were negative were from God. They were of God. But God intends for creation to know him, not know him, not to be blind, not to be deaf, not to be apart from him. And he wants to be, as he puts it, everything in all people. He wants them to be all things, all life to all people. That's his good design. So let's go to Jeremiah 29, verse 11. Jeremiah 29, verse 11, and this is God speaking to every living human being and everyone who has not been alive for a while, who is asleep, and everyone who will be alive throughout all of human creation. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the thoughts that I think toward you, he says the Lord, thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. His intention is for everyone to know who we are. He wants all men to come to the knowledge of the truth and to be saved. His intention is not to hide. His intention is not to discuss. His intention is to save and give life. The point being that we can take God as some sort of authority figure who we don't necessarily agree with, but we better. On the Day of Trumpets, it's going to start to become obvious we actually want to agree with him. We really want life his way. So our first thought was God intends for his creation to know him and for him to be all within it. That's his good design. The second thought is that we humans actually are allowed, we may come to see, because God allows it, for us to come to see that we're designed and created and sustained in this grand design. Let's go to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 3. Ecclesiastes 3. He has actually designed us before we existed. He designed all of humanity with a couple of things in them that humanity doesn't really understand, but they're there. And of course, when we misunderstand the things, the approaches, the mindsets that he puts in us, and we misunderstand and misuse them, we end up ignoring him and turning on him. But nonetheless, he put this here. Ecclesiastes 3, and then verse 9. Let's start there. Ecclesiastes 3:9. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I've seen the God-given task with which sons of men are to be occupied, so we have a life. You know, what profit is there in that? Verse 11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. In other words, good. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts. He has. Except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to the end. Oh. So we have a sense or a desire to live forever. We know that's a possibility, but we don't know how that works. So we just work. That's what this is saying. We just delve into our own lives. Let's keep going. Verse 12. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their time. There's nothing better. And I have to tell you, I ought to share this with you. I had a discussion with someone here recently about how, you know, God has Sabbaths, and that's when he wants us to give us our time, and then the rest of the time we work at what we do for ourselves, and then there are times when we work for God. And I said, well, that's an Old Testament approach, kind of. But when we're owned by God, our whole life is his. The reason for us to be alive, to be functioning, to be thinking, what is thought? Where did that come from? Our existence, where did it come from? The reality is we are owned by him, and everything we do is for him. Everything we do is to be for him. Verse 13, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. That labor is a gift of God. There's nothing we have that isn't from him. Oh, that's what that says. Yeah. Okay, so then he's put a trinity in our hearts. Our desire is to go on. You think, have you ever seen, I don't know how many have seen this, but there are videos of lions attacking antelope on the open plains of Africa. And there are times when an antelope will stand there and be eaten alive, standing there. You go, well, how does that work? Why would that be? It's because they don't have something you have. You have a sense of eternity in your heart. You actually know there's a possibility you will go on living. The animal doesn't know that. So, hey, I'm being eaten, all right. If you think about the way animals are compared to us, they're afraid of things, they remember things, but they don't have a sense of eternity. Just really watch them, and you'll notice that we do, and they don't. Let's go back to Acts 17. God has put in us information we don't really understand, but it's information that allows us to understand when he calls us, when we respond to him. Acts 17, part of this is about Paul being in Athens, and he's looking at all of the gods that are put up, and here he comes to an altar, and it's an altar that was put up by the philosophers who want to know new things. They want to know, oh, we want to know what you have to say, sir. And this altar is to the unknown God. So he said, let me tell you about that unknown God. Acts 17, verse 26. What is he saying about the God? Acts 17, verse 26. And Paul says to them, and he, that God, has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their habitations. You mean I'm not in charge of my life? Well, Paul said you're a slave to whoever you obey. No, we're not actually in charge of our life. We don't really create anything or design anything or make anything happen. All we work is inside the creation that's already here. Verse 27. Verse 27. So that they should seek the Lord. That's why God's done this. So that they should seek the Lord in the hope. Again, he wishes us to have a hope. In the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. And verse 28. For in him we live. We wouldn't be alive if it weren't for him. In him we live. He's speaking to unconverted philosophers. This isn't the church. For in him we live and move. And here's an interesting phrase, have our being. Have you ever wondered what that means? Well, we have our being. What's that mean? Well, the Greek translation really is unclear here in English. What it actually means, a very good way to translate that is, in him we have a sense of a purpose. Eternity is in our heart. And in him we have a sense of a purpose, whether we're converted or not. We know we have value. We know we move forward. We know there's something in charge, above us, beyond us. So our second thought is that we humans may come to see. In other words, maybe shorthand is humanity's ready to hear. Humanity's ready to understand. We are understanding now. And then the third thing, how? How is humanity supposed to respond to this creation plan? Okay, let's go back to Romans 11. Romans 11. It's in here somewhere. Oh, yeah, I remember now. Romans 11. See, that's what happens when you use a computer all the time. Romans 11. But I actually believe it's a good idea to get a Bible out when we speak together, to use a Bible, because guess what I can do? I can get it in front of you, leave you behind if I have a computer. Why aren't you following? So anyway, now, see, I know you can't find it any faster than me. All right, so we're in Romans 11. Here's a quick rule about Bible study, right? Especially New Testament Bible study. If you see the word therefore, you ought to take a look at what was spoken before that word. Therefore. Well, what was spoken before that? Therefore. Well, what is therefore referring to? Well, let's take a look at this. Romans 11, verse 33. Romans 11, 33. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. He's trying to explain to us, I put in you the desire to be associated with my thinking, my way. You just didn't get it. You don't understand it. Verse 34, for who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has become his counselor, or who has first given to him, yet it should be repaid to him. What can we do to hurt him? What can we do to take from him? What can we do to give him things? Nothing. He owns us. He made us. He sustains us. We're dust. We're here for a moment. Okay. And then verse 38. For of him, and through him, and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. So be it. But my problems and my agendas are not included in all things. No, they're included. Everything we are, ever have been, way before we were ever even a twinkle in our Father's eye, we were planned. And what happened was that God brought you and I into being. There was a moment we started. We actually are temporal. We began. He did that. And there's a moment when we will not be ongoing, unless Christ returns while we're alive. The bottom line to all of this is that we have a response. I wonder what that would be. Verse 1, chapter 12 of Romans. Romans 12:1. I beseech you, and there's that word, therefore. So in other words, when you see therefore, what are you looking at that preceded it? What preceded it was being told that God's in charge, that everything we are is given by him, that God gives, including our being, our destiny, our design, our support, our conversion, our future, and our hope. He gives it. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies, that your very life, a living sacrifice, separate from society, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. This isn't something you get a medal for. This is how it's supposed to be. This is how we're designed. If Adam and Eve had actually done this, there wouldn't have been the problem. Verse 2, and not be conformed to this world. Don't use its criteria, which is what we were brought up in and part of. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove. Why would you be transformed? That you may prove, by living the rest of your life, following God, that you can prove what's acceptable and perfect, and the perfect will of God. So the general idea here is that God intends for creation to know, and for him to be all in all. And that we humans, the second thing is that we humans may be allowed to come to see it. And in the church, we are allowed. And ultimately, how human beings are to respond is to give themselves completely up, just like he does. Our lives, all creation, come from him giving it. And for us, the events of trumpets this day start that brand new life right now. We're allowed, actually invited to participate. Let's end in 1 Chronicles 29. 1 Chronicles 29. David, King David, is speaking a prayer publicly. And we're allowed to participate in God's way of life. 1 Chronicles 29, verse 11. And he's speaking for the people. And he says, yours, O Lord, verse 29, chapter 29, verse 11. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, not ours, and certainly not his. He was king, but not his. Lord, yours is the greatness, the power, the glory, the victory, and the majesty. For all that is in heaven and in earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord. And you are the exalted head over all of it. It's interesting, we have to tell him that. He already knows. We don't. So we need to voice it. Both riches and honor come from you, and you reign over it all, and your hand is power and might, and in your hand is to make great and to give strength to all. Therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. to learn to experience giving, to learn to be like God. God allows his people to participate in this plan, and the way we do it, strangely enough, is to do it by our agreeing with him. Verse 14, 1 Chronicles 29:14, but who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to offer so willingly as this? For all things come from you, and of your own we have given you. For we are aliens and pilgrims. We don't even really belong here. We are aliens and pilgrims before you, as were all our fathers. Our days on earth are as a shadow and without hope. Remember what we started out with in Jeremiah 29? I want you to have a future and a hope. We're without hope unless God gives it. We are learning to be like God, learning to be giving.